It was 6:45 a.m. when Malcolm Reed pulled into the parking lot of Apex Dynamics, the towering corporate building glinting under the early morning sun. He stepped out of his modest black sedan wearing a simple gray polo, khaki pants, and a baseball cap that shadowed most of his face. He carried a small brown leather bag, scuffed at the edges. As he walked across the lot toward the employee entrance, a security guard at the front glanced up lazily, barely acknowledging him before turning his attention back to his phone. No greetings. No questions. Just an assumption. Malcolm entered the building quietly, walking past rows of marble floors and glass walls that echoed the cold professionalism of the place. The cleaning crew had just finished mopping the lobby, and a few early-rising executives buzzed by with coffee cups in hand and Bluetooth headsets lodged in their ears. No one paid Malcolm any mind. And that was exactly how he wanted it, for now. He walked into the elevator, punched the code for the executive floor, and waited. But the elevator blinked red. Access denied. He sighed and tapped his badge again. Still red. The system hadn't been updated. Again. He stepped back just as a tall, sharply dressed woman entered the elevator, her heels clacking against the tile like a metronome. She gave him one look and rolled her eyes. This one's for executives only. Maintenance uses the service elevator, she said curtly. Malcolm blinked. I work here, he replied evenly. Sure you do, she scoffed, tapping the button for the top floor. There's a spill in the cafeteria from last night's party. Might want to get on that. Before he could respond, the doors closed, and she was gone. Malcolm exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He turned and walked down the hall toward the service elevator. He'd taken it before. Years ago. Back when he was a janitor, before the degrees, before the investments, before the hard nights spent studying financial statements under flickering fluorescent lights. But today? Today he owned 51% of Apex Dynamics. He was the majority shareholder. The new CEO. But no one in this building knew that yet. The board hadn't announced it. The papers weren't signed until later that morning. And Malcolm had requested it that way, for a reason. He had built his way up from nothing, from wiping floors in buildings just like this one to earning his MBA at night while working double shifts. He'd studied the game from the sidelines, watching bosses belittle staff, watching talent get overlooked because of how someone dressed or the color of their skin. He knew the culture. He knew how they treated people who looked like him. So he devised a plan, to see the company from the bottom up. One last time. He had quietly acquired shares over years, made strategic investments, built partnerships, and finally brokered a deal that placed him at the helm. But before he walked into that boardroom with his title engraved in brass, he wanted to experience one last day, anonymously. And so, Malcolm rode the service elevator to the top floor. No briefcase. No designer suit. Just presence. When he stepped off, the receptionist barely looked up. Janitorial team isn't supposed to be up here without clearance, she said, pushing her glasses up. There's a spill in conference room B, make it quick. He nodded silently and walked down the corridor, taking note of how every office door shut behind him, how stairs lingered just a second too long. In one of the corner offices, a man stood with his arms crossed, laughing loudly at a joke Malcolm couldn't hear. Brian Lancaster. Acting CEO until the transition was finalized. Malcolm had met him twice, once in a boardroom, once at a charity gala where Brian mistook him for valet. Both times, he was dismissive, cocky, and condescending. Brian noticed Malcolm walking by and rapped his knuckles on the glass. Hey! No loitering. If you're done with whatever janitor business you got, there's trash in the executive lounge. Make yourself useful. Malcolm turned slowly, met his gaze, and nodded. Of course, sir. Brian chuckled and went back to his conversation, never realizing the man he just dismissed would be signing his performance review within hours. Malcolm continued through the floor, observing, noting names, faces, behavior. By 9:30 a.m., he had made his rounds. He returned to the lobby where the HR director, a woman named Clarissa, stood sipping coffee and talking loudly about upcoming layoffs. "It's unfortunate," she was saying to a colleague. "We've got to cut somewhere. The diversity hires haven't exactly been pulling their weight." Malcolm's eyebrows lifted slightly. So this was the culture he was inheriting. Toxic. Arrogant. Dismissive. A system designed to keep certain people in power and others conveniently invisible. He watched as Clarissa spotted him from across the room and raised an eyebrow. "Lost?" she asked, smirking. "Custodial meetings are in the basement." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Thanks for the direction," he said, walking past her and heading toward the executive boardroom. He tapped his badge once again. The light blinked green this time. The door clicked open. Inside, the board members were already gathering. Sharp suits. Polished shoes. Laptops open. Brian sat at the head of the table, confident, relaxed. When he saw Malcolm enter, he laughed. "Unless you're here to clean up the coffee I spilled earlier, you're in the wrong room, my guy." The others chuckled politely. No one stood. No one welcomed him. Malcolm walked to the far end of the table and placed his bag on the seat. He opened it, pulled out a crisp folder, and slid it across the table. "I believe these are the finalized documents from legal," he said calmly. Brian scoffed. "You deliver documents too now?" Impressive range. One of the older board members, Mr. Whitman, picked up the folder, eyes scanning rapidly. His brows furrowed. Then lifted. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice tightening with realization. This confirms the leadership transition. Effective immediately. Malcolm Reed is officially the CEO of Apex Dynamics." Silence fell like a hammer. Chairs squeaked. Mouths opened but no words followed. Brian blinked in disbelief. "Wait, what?" Malcolm stepped forward, now pulling out a small nameplate from his bag. He placed it on the table. "Malcolm Reed, Chief Executive Officer." "Good morning," he said, voice steady. "Let's begin." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the reality settled. Brian's face paled as he stood. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered. "You can't be this." No one said anything. "The board voted," Mr. Whitman said firmly. "The acquisition is complete. Malcolm owns controlling interest. The decision is final." Malcolm looked directly at Brian. "Funny thing about janitors," he said, voice calm but laced with steel. "We see everything. We hear everything. We know how to clean up messes. And this company, Brian, is a mess." The tension snapped. The room sat frozen as Malcolm began laying out his vision. A complete restructure. Department audits. New hiring policies. Diversity reform. Community reinvestment. Every bullet point challenged the status quo. Every word drove a stake into the toxic culture they had built. And then, just before the meeting adjourned, he looked to Clarissa. "As of this morning," he said, "HR will be under direct review. Your comments in the lobby were unacceptable. We'll be investigating all hiring practices moving forward." Her face drained of color. She tried to speak, but Malcolm had already turned away. After the meeting, murmurs swept through the building like a storm. Whispers became conversations. Conversations became curiosity. Employees who had felt invisible for years now dared to hope. Back in the HR department, Clarissa sat frozen, reviewing the files she had just mocked only hours earlier. A memo from the board confirmed Malcolm's leadership and hinted at a full policy overhaul. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was exposed. Meanwhile, Malcolm walked the floor, his floor now, engaging with employees from every level. He spoke with the janitors by name. He visited the mailroom, asked the clerks how they liked their jobs. In the IT department, he listened as staff vented about outdated systems and the lack of respect from executives. He made mental notes of every face, every story. This wasn't a stunt. This was a reckoning. By lunchtime, he had assembled a task force. Not of executives, but of department heads, assistants, and even interns who had shown potential. They were to help advise him on the restructuring process. It was the first time many of them had ever been asked for input. In a private meeting that afternoon, Malcolm sat with Mr. Whitman. "You knew what this place had become," Malcolm said. Mr. Whitman nodded solemnly. "I did. But I also knew what it needed. That's why I voted for you. Not just for your credentials, but your perspective. This company's future depends on that." Malcolm nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure it has one." That evening, long after most had gone home, Malcolm stood once more by the window in his office. The city shimmered beneath him, alive with stories like his, invisible ones. He thought of his mother, who cleaned houses and taught him dignity wasn't about job titles. He thought of the friends he lost to poverty and systemic neglect. He thought of every door slammed in his face. And then, he smiled. Because now, he held the keys. Not for revenge. But for restoration. For rebuilding. He picked up his phone and made one last call for the day. "Yes, I'd like to set up a scholarship fund. For custodial workers and their families. We'll call it the Quiet Power Grant. Greatness doesn't always come in a tailored suit. Sometimes, it comes in khakis and a cap. And sometimes, the janitor owns the building."